As we begin, I want to welcome you to, and in fact, I was going to call Jason out. I said, there's no way this is our 28th gathering. This is our 28th gathering online. And this time is sponsored by ELCA's Coaching Ministry. And again, we're so glad you're here today. I'm Jill Beverlin. I am the National Coordinator of Coaching for the ELCA, and I'm one of your facilitators today. As we begin, it's important for us to remind one another that this time is meant to be a safe and brave space for all of us to bring the truth of who we are and how we're doing. These conversations are meant to be an intentional step to live more fully into God's dream for us as the body of Christ. Our guest speaker today is Sarah Jackson. She is founder of Casa de Paz. And friends, I am so excited for you to meet Sarah and hear her story. Sarah's tale is a beautiful example of what can happen when we do choose to say yes to God. When we put aside our fear and our limited earthly vision of what is and is not possible. And also how God multiplies blessings when we choose to work together for the purposes of love. After meeting Sarah, Jason and I were absolutely convinced that the Spirit brought her to us for a time such as this. Because I believe many of us come to this place and this space today not knowing the way forward, uncertain of how to help in situations that feel absolutely insurmountable. Mother Teresa is credited with saying, "Not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love." And Sarah's story starts small, with a one-bedroom apartment through which she and a friend began offering hospitality to families separated by immigrant detention. And you will hear how God has used this offering and has grown it to become a home, actually now lots of homes, where isolation is eased and reuniting families is the goal. Casa de Paz is the only organization in Colorado offering this type of hospitality and shelter to released immigrants and their families. In the words of our guest speaker today, if we don't do this, we don't know of anyone else who will. Casa de Paz is a promise that as long as detention centers keep families apart, there will also be a welcoming home with doors wide open with them. And friends, I really want you to hear this part of a quote from their website. "When we think of doing this alone, it seems impossible. But when we think of doing it together, we know it will work." I could keep going, but you all really need to hear Sarah's story and her testimony. Sarah, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Jill and Jason, for inviting me to be part of your time. And thank you to each and every one of you who has joined the meeting. I will say, just to start off, this is maybe the first Zoom meeting I have been part of since March, when everything started going online, where everyone is muted already and nobody has to say, "Don't forget to mute yourself." So you are well trained, and I just want to give props to y'all. All right, before I get into a little bit more about Casa de Paz and what we do here in Denver, Colorado, I would like to start off our time by reading one of my favorite poems by Andrew Pakula, and it is called "We Arrive Together Here." So I'll invite us to take a couple of deep breaths, and if you're comfortable closing your eyes or keeping them open, whatever you would like to do, I will read this poem. We arrive together here. We arrive together here, travelers on life's journey, seekers of meaning, of love, of healing, of justice, of truth. The journey is long, and joy and woe accompany us at every step. None is born that does not die. None feels pleasure that does not also feel pain. The tear has not yet dried on the cheek, but the lips curve sweetly in a smile. Numerous are our origins, our paths, and our destinations. And yet happily, our ways have joined together here today. Spirit of life, source of love. May our joining be a blessing. May it bring comfort to those who are in pain. May it bring hope to those who despair. May it bring peace to those who tremble in fear. May it bring wisdom and guidance for our journeys. And though this joining may be for just a moment in time, this moment is all we can ever be certain of. May we embrace this and every instant of our lives. Thank you for participating in that with me. To begin today's conversation, I'm just curious, show of hands, and I can scroll through here and look at all y'all's faces. How many of y'all have ever heard of immigrant detention? Let's start with that question. Heard of an immigrant detention center? Okay, quite a few. And how many have actually been to an immigrant detention center? Yeah, so some of y'all have been. For me, my story started about 11 or 12 years ago. I knew nothing about immigrant detention. I grew up, I was about 24, 25 years old, never, ever, ever hearing that immigrant detention centers were a thing. Just wasn't a blip on my radar. I just didn't know. I was actually working at a church in Colorado Springs, which, if you know Denver at all, Colorado Springs is about an hour and a half now with traffic away from Denver. And I was working as the pastor's assistant at the church. And I don't know how many of y'all have assistants who go through your emails in the morning to respond to your emails, but that was one of my jobs working at the church. I would wake up in the morning, I'd get to work, I'd open up the laptop, and I would actually read our pastor's emails and respond to them for him, so that when he got to the office, he maybe had 2 or 3 emails there that I just didn't know how to respond to. That was one of my responsibilities. And I loved it. I loved my job. So one morning I get to the office, open up the laptop, got my coffee there, and there's this invitation. It's an email invitation from a group called Catholic Charities. And what they were doing was putting a group of pastors from Colorado Springs together, 5 or 6 pastors, a small group, to go down to the Arizona-Mexico border to learn about immigration, but not just immigration in general, but more specifically, what does our faith say of how we should welcome immigrants when they come to the country that we happen to live in? So it had a perspective of learning on matters of specifically our scripture. What does scripture say that we do when interacting with immigrants? Like I mentioned before, never ever thought really about immigration, did not know anything about immigrant detention centers, wasn't really interested when I saw the email come through, to be honest with you. I just knew it was another trip our pastor was being invited on. So I checked the calendar to see if it would work with his schedule. He was out of the office the week of that trip. So I was replying to Catholic Charities and I was thanking them for the invite, but I was going to respectfully decline and say, just didn't work out. Thank you, but no thanks. Just as I was about to press send, I noticed some words at the very bottom of that email that popped out to me. You know, immigration, immersion trip didn't pop out to me. Learning about our faith and deepening our understanding of hospitality and welcome didn't pop out to me. What popped out to me were these words at the bottom: all expenses paid trip to Mexico. I love to travel. So suddenly, after seeing that it was a free trip to Mexico, I was very excited and eager to learn, and I needed to go on this trip. So I asked if I could attend the trip and then just report back to our pastor and to our church about what I had learned, never thinking that I would actually have a life-changing experience. I just thought I was going on a vacation. And I was telling this to Jason and Jill earlier. When I saw that invitation for an all expenses paid trip to Mexico, I seriously saw myself on the beach with a pina colada. And I still to this day don't know why my brain worked like that, because it clearly said in the invitation it was a trip to the Arizona Mexico border. There's no beach in Arizona, just in case anyone is wondering. I found that out when I went down there. But God works in mysterious ways, because I ended up going on that trip. And for the very first time in my life, my eyes were open to this reality that I had never knew existed before. And we spent some of the time on the Mexico side of the border meeting with folks who had just been deported from the United States. Then we spent some of our time on the US side of the border meeting with asylum seekers who had just arrived to the United States, seeking safety from persecution in their country of origin. And the most powerful part of that trip, was obviously meeting people who were personally affected by our country's immigration policies, by the physical border wall there. And I knew right away that what I was hearing, the stories that were being told to me, were it didn't sit well in my soul and in my gut. I knew this is not an okay way to treat people. And an interesting thing that happened to me was that as I was hearing these stories, I was looking at the person who was telling me their story, but somehow their face started to change almost. And instead of Augustine, who was sharing his story of being deported, it was then I actually saw my father's face in Augustine's face. And I met a group of immigrants who were fleeing persecution in Central America, and there was a young woman who was pregnant and was shivering in the cold of the day, and instead of seeing her face when she was telling me the reasons of coming to the United States for safety, I started seeing my sister's face. And I imagined, right, the golden rule, how would I want my family to be treated if this was my father or my mother or my brother or my sister? And I knew this was not the way I would want them to be treated. And so, right, like in our scripture, it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And I would never want to be treated the way that the new friends that I met on the border were being treated. And I knew I wouldn't want my family to be treated that way. So when I came back from that trip, I knew I just couldn't forget what I had seen. I couldn't go back to my normal life that, I had created. And I didn't know exactly what it is that I wanted to do, but I knew that the Spirit was telling me, there's got to be something here, Sarah, surrounding immigrants, specifically who have been separated by their families, and a part that you can play to create a place for families to be reunited again. And so one of the gentlemen, after that trip, I came back to Colorado Springs, and for the next 1.5 to 2 years, it's just been some time reflecting and learning and asking and praying and discerning, what should I do? And almost every day I thought of this young man that I met on the border, whose name is Augustine. And I write about him in the book that I just wrote called The House That Love Built. And this is really the story of my time on the border, and then all the way, fast forward now 8 years later, where like Jill mentioned, we have many homes offering hospitality to families separated by detention, literally thousands of volunteers who are part of being, showing God's love and being part of what God is already doing in our city. And by the way, I know that Jason and Jill had sent out a link to get a copy of the book for free, my gift to you. If you haven't signed up to receive a copy and you would like it, Jason is going to put the link in. Oh, he just did it. Yay. He put the link in there. You can fill it out. We'll send you a copy of the book. And then he'll also include it in the recorded email that he sends out later. So I'm going to read just a couple of pages here from the book, specifically about that interaction that I had with Augustine. Our final visit was to a migrant shelter for men in Agua Prieta called Centro De Atencion Migrante Exodus. Nearby was another shelter for women and children. Many people who get deported from the US end up here, including those who have lived in the United States a long time. If they don't have relatives in Mexico, and many don't, they're on their own. Once they're handed over to the Mexican government, processed and released, they immediately become homeless. I found this out over dinner. When our group arrived at the shelter, I was overwhelmed by all the Spanish being spoken. I knew almost none. I felt a little lost. When dinner time came, I heard a guy speaking English who looked like a volunteer. I made a beeline to him. "Your English is so good," I told him. He introduced himself. "I'm Augustine," a Spanish name, but a US accent. A guy, maybe 30, with a calm demeanor. "My family is in Nevada," he said. "I grew up there, and I was just deported." "Deported?" "So," I ventured, "are you from the USA?" "I thought I was. I grew up believing I was. My parents brought me here when I was little, from Mexico." Augustine's manner, his gestures, his speech, they were just like those of so many guys I knew back in the Springs. I couldn't get my head around this guy's being deported. I was just about to turn 16. I needed my birth certificate to take to the DMV. His parents told him why they didn't have one. They had wanted to give him a chance at a better life. They never imagined what their decision would ultimately mean for their son. If he wanted, the teenage Augustine could do what the law told him, go back to Mexico and apply for a visa. But the wait for someone like him wasn't months, it was years. Like any 16-year-old, he wasn't ready to change the whole trajectory of his life. I didn't believe him at first. I thought he must have committed a crime. I mean, he was married to a US citizen and he wasn't allowed in the US? Come on. Augustine said unless he could prove he had been abused, neglected, or abandoned, he would have to leave. So he did what a lot of kids in his situation would do. He got a diploma, learned a trade, married, had children, started a business, hired people, got involved in his community, his church. "How many kids?" "3, he said. "My baby girl is 10 months. I shook my head. "How long have you been away?" "A year, he said. That meant he was here in Mexico when his daughter was born. Something passed across Augustine's eyes. He lifted his plastic cup, steadying himself. "I've never held her," he said. He suddenly stood up and I followed him to the line for dinner, bean soup and rolls. As we filled our bowls, I couldn't stop gazing at Augustine. He wiped his eyes, looking tired. US law says if you're deported after knowingly living in the US illegally, you're banned from reapplying to re-enter for 10 years. When Augustine told me this, he finally broke. He brought his hands to his face and his shoulders began to heave. "I just want to hold my baby girl." I'm going to skip forward a little bit here. The following year, 2011, about 200,000 people were deported from the United States. If even half of them had families here, then about 500,000 people in the US were forcibly separated from a loved one. Could I ignore this? On the shuttle ride to the Tucson airport, I wrestled hard. I loved my life. I loved everything about it. But I couldn't pretend I had just had my world upended. But I couldn't pretend I hadn't just had my world upended. I'd heard new things from the Bible and had been given eyes to see, and yet I wrestled. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, Jesus said. Obey the law. Do what is right. Yet another passage kept coming to mind, one I'd learned as a kid. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Matthew 22, 37 through 40. I knew the true law. It was to love. The feeling in the pit of my stomach told me I had to obey it. So I came back, not knowing what that pit in my stomach would eventually lead me to, but I am forever grateful that it led me to open up a hospitality home called Casa de Paz. I found out that in Denver, there's an immigrant detention center, and on an average day, there are anywhere between 1,000 to 1,500 immigrants that are detained in this detention center. It's run by a for-profit prison company called GEO. So what happens is that GEO, this for-profit, they make billions of dollars a year in profit, prison company, talks to ICE. So this is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So GEO says, hey, I know that you are responsible, ICE, for detaining immigrants in the country, whether asylum seekers who have just come to the United States for protection, or folks like Augustine who have been living in the United States undocumented. So we know that you're detaining immigrants. We've got a prison. We will detain them for you, and we'll charge you, maybe $150 a day to detain immigrants. So ICE looks at the contract, they come up with an agreement, and then ICE turns over detained immigrants to companies like GEO. So GEO operates prisons all over the country. We just happen to have one here in Aurora or in Denver, Colorado. There are hundreds of detention centers all over the country, and I would think it's very safe to say that most of you live closer to an immigrant detention center than you know. And not only are folks held in detention centers specifically designated for immigrants, like this one in Aurora, Colorado. I keep saying Aurora and Denver. Most people know Denver, Colorado. The detention center's in Aurora, which is like 5 minutes from Denver, so now you know. I'm not trying to lie or change my story. I'll just say Denver, hopefully. Anyways, immigrants can also be held in county jails. So if you have a county jail in your county and there's an undocumented immigrant who's held by ICE, they can also be held in jails. So here in Colorado, there are many county jails where immigrants are also held. I just happened to find out that here in Denver, there's this massive detention center where immigrants are held. And so once again, that pit in my stomach was telling me, move closer, move closer. So I moved literally across the street from the detention center. I rented a 1-bedroom apartment. I modeled my Casa de Paz, which means house of peace, after another hospitality home in Georgia called El Refugio, which means the refuge. And originally 8 years ago, when I opened up Casa de Paz, it was going to be a home for families who were driving in from out of town to visit their loved ones who were locked up. Kind of think like the Ronald McDonald home or house, but for families separated by detention. So like any other prison system, if you're detained in North Carolina or in Tennessee or in Georgia, and you're in custody of ICE, whether you're in a for-profit detention center or a county jail, you can wake up one morning and hear a knock on your cell door, and it's the ICE officer telling you to pack up your bags, you're being transferred. So folks can be transferred from all over the country and end up here in Denver, Colorado, without ever being, knowing anything about Denver or Colorado. They could end up here. And so when families come in from out of town to visit their mom or their dad or their daughter or their son, they could stay at Casa de Paz, my 1-bedroom apartment, for free. And I would move from my bedroom to the couch. I'd sleep on the couch, and then the family could have my bedroom. And most often families were in town for maybe 2 or 3 days. we'd have meals together. We would talk, you know, just mi casa es su casa. My home is your home. And just that concept of sharing if we out of our abundance, right? Like I had more space than I needed. Why not share it? But now fast forward 8 years later, we have 3 programs that we operate now. First, our hospitality home, which Jill mentioned earlier. We don't just have one Casa de Paz anymore. We have dozens of folks in the Denver area who open up their personal homes as well. We call them las casitas, the little homes. And that's where someone in our community would open up their personal home for maybe 1 or 2 nights for a family. Or here's our second program. We have a post-release support program. So because I was literally across the street from the detention center, and I was going over to the detention center every single day when I first started the CASA, the guards and the ICE officers started to know who I was, and we started to develop some kind of, you know, very interesting friendship. And when immigrants are released from detention, so they've won their case or they get released on bond or something like that, they're released from detention. But like I mentioned earlier, because people can get transferred all over the country, oftentimes they're transferred to Colorado. And if they're released, they don't know anyone. They don't have a friend that they can call to say, hey, come pick me up. They don't have even a phone to make that call or money to make, do they have phone booths anymore? But if they do, like they didn't even, most folks don't even have, I think whatever it was, 50 cents to make a call. So what we do now is every single day, we send volunteers to the detention center. Yesterday, for example, we sent one of our volunteers, Sophia, over in the morning to the detention center, and she picked up a young woman who was arrested by ICE in California and then transferred over here to Colorado. And when she got out, she needed a way to get back to California. ICE doesn't coordinate that transportation back where she was originally detained. So her sister called me a couple days and said, hey, my sister is detained in Colorado. She's going to get out on Tuesday, and we are worried about how to get her home. She doesn't know anyone. We found out about you. Could you please be there to greet her when she gets released? And we said, of course. So Sophia went over yesterday, picked up this young woman from the detention center after her release, brought her over to the CASA, where we had a backpack full of toiletries, new clothes, because when immigrants are released from detention, they're given the same clothes they were arrested in, and oftentimes those are old and they don't smell very good because they've been in plastic bags for months or years. Folks are held indefinitely in detention centers. They're not serving a sentence for any crime committed. They're just waiting until the immigration judge makes a decision about their case, whether they can stay or they must be deported. We have food at the CASA, a cell phone we give our guests so that when they're en route to reunite with their family, they can stay in contact. And then once we were able to buy her a plane ticket, Sophia went to the airport with her, walked through security, because that's a nerve-wracking experience, as you can imagine, made sure she got it all the way safely to the gate. And then we waved goodbye and we said, let us know when you get home safely. And then yesterday, her sister did text me kind of late at night when she had landed, and she said, we picked her up a few hours ago. She's home safe with family. Thank you again. And let me just count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 exclamation points at the end of that sentence. And what did we do? Nothing magical, right? Nothing. This is not rocket science. It's simply coming alongside someone and making sure that they're treated the same way that we all would want to be treated and the way that we all deserve to be treated. So and then the third program that we also have is our visitation program. So for immigrants who are locked in detention and have no one local who can stop by and visit them, we have a visitation program where we train volunteers to go into the detention center and spend time with folks. And just a reminder that they are not forgotten about, that there are people in the outside who don't know them but care about them an awful lot. And we're just there with them, during one of the most traumatic experiences of their life. So as of yesterday, since we opened up 8 years ago, we have hosted 3,000 121 guests from 77 countries. So that's from more than 2/3 of the countries in all of the world that have passed through under the roof of Casa de Paz. And this is all done by volunteers. We don't have any paid staff. We all have our day jobs, and then we do this because we know it's the right thing to do. And then to pay our expenses, obviously we have folks who donate, and some of y'all have actually donated. So thank you very much for that. But at the very beginning, when Casa de Paz wasn't really known, and no, I wasn't going to ask someone for donations when we had hosted like 2 people in the apartment. I needed money, right, to pay our rent and to pay our utilities. So I started a volleyball league called Volleyball Internacional, and it's a place where people come together and play volleyball, which is a fun sport. And all of the profit from that league is donated to Casa de Paz so that we can continue to keep our doors open. Even in the midst of a pandemic, we're obviously taking certain precautions to be safe, but we are still open, and we're still, sending the message very loud and very clear that immigrants are welcome, and that we understand that they are worthy of all the dignity and kindness that we are also worthy of. So I know I was only supposed to talk for like 15 or 20 minutes. I talked way longer. I'm going to stop talking, and then I think Jill or Jason are going to work their magic, and then we're going to end up in breakout rooms.
Wow, right? Does that encapsulate everything? What energy, enthusiasm, passion. Yeah, Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I jotted a few other things down as you were talking. I'm so impressed the way you see, hear, and choose to respond to God tapping on your heart. Thank you for that and sharing that story. And friends, I just want to encourage you, look at what can happen, the ripple effect of love when you choose to say yes, right? And Sarah started with what she had. And so as we do move to our breakout rooms and continue to contemplate this incredible tale, these are the questions that Jason and I lift up for you. How are you doing this day? What do you bring into this shared space? What is standing out to you from Sarah's story? To what might God be asking you to say yes to in this time? What is your next most faithful step? And how might this happen in community? So Jason will, as always, share these on, he'll blast them on the chat as you're in your rooms. We invite you to take these into your heart and consider them as you share with your partners. Please remember that you are invited to use this time to speak the truth of who you are and how you are doing. You may choose to share, listen, or simply be as you consider God's invitation and the next most faithful step that you might take. So friends, welcome back to the main room. We hope that you had inspiring and revealing conversations about what God might be inviting you to say yes to. Or as Julianne said, maybe it's what you need to say no to first, right? So as a way of unpacking, I'm wondering if while keeping the confidence of your small group partners, if there were some themes that you heard that you're willing to share. Friend.
Yeah, Jill, I'll jump in right now with that, because the last thing that we talked about was the phrase, tell the story. To start talking, affecting the hearts and minds of people, tell that story and push that out there. We have a lot of people we need to, show reality to and where God needs to lead us. But to get there, it's going to be telling the story. So.
Thank you, Barbara. And Sarah showed us how to do that just so well, right? So vibrantly. Yeah. What are some other themes that lifted up in your small group time?
Hi there. One of the things that we talked about is just really the importance of listening and learning what questions to ask to really do understand those stories so we can share them, and recognizing, and maybe this is because of COVID-19, but many of the themes that we've been talking about for the last, 27, 28 Wednesdays has really brought an openness to our eyes and understanding that we, because of the way history has been told, we don't understand maybe more of the real story, and been sheltered from many things that have not been shared or shared as openly or as with the same level of intensity that other parts of the story have been told. And we need to help open up the eyes and hearts of others by sharing more of these stories. So.
Amen. And so glad that you raised that, Pastor Janice. We have Dr. Larry Clark, and I see also Dr. Richard Stewart on. They will be with us in 2 Wednesdays, I believe, sharing part 2 of Black Lutheran history. So we look forward to that, right? That will help and inform us in that arena for sure. Yeah. How about one more person sharing themes or what God shone a light on for you in your small group sharing time?
We talked about how there are so many things that need our attention, that it's possible to spend a great deal of time just trying to get up to speed. And at some point, you need to answer a call to some sort of action on these issues that become important to us.
Excellent. Excellent.
Joanne,
Yeah.
that's what we found was interesting, because Sarah didn't wait for an official policy or procedure.
Right.
She felt the Spirit and she went and did, based on the Spirit moving her.
Let me just clarify that, because I did, but it took a while. I will say this: when I got back from that trip, I knew my life was going to change, and I didn't want it to change. I was perfectly happy. I had like a very routine, structured life. So I would wake up in the morning and I just said no. Like I heard God say, do something. I said, no, like a stubborn toddler. And then I just got tired of saying no. I was exhausted. I was like, this is so exhausting every morning saying no. What would happen if I said yes? So it wasn't necessarily that I was just like, oh yeah, let's do it. It was more like, no. Fine, okay. And it's easier now that I said okay.
Thank you for sharing more of the backstory, Sarah, and just again, your authenticity about sometimes God does bring us kicking and screaming a little bit into that reality. But the posture now that you said, it's so much easier now that you have said yes. And so, and friends, I just want to publicly say thank you again to Sarah Jackson for being with us in this time, sharing her amazing and inspiring story. It really sets us up well for our topic for next week. If you were with us the first Wednesday in September, you learned that we are going to be holding the first Wednesday every month to be talking about our grief and how we process that in healthy ways. Well, guess what, friends? Here's the bookend to that. The third Wednesday of every month, we're going to be talking about a way of approaching life in our congregations and through specifically the lens of growing young. And that's one of, growing young is one of the future directions that the ELCA is hoping to be moving into. And it doesn't mean just literally growing young. It means our posture of young. And I think that Sarah is a really great example of this, right? About this new life that came to her when she answered the call, when she chose to say yes and do it for the case of sharing love and hospitality, especially to immigrants. Please pray with me. Dear Jesus, our journey through life is long and hard. We cannot make this trip alone. We must walk together on the journey. You promised to send us a helper, your Spirit. Help us to see your Spirit in those you send to journey with us. In the refugee family seeking safety from violence, let us see your Spirit, Lord. In the immigrant worker bringing food to our tables, let us see your Spirit, Lord. In the asylum seeker seeking justice for himself and his family, let us see your Spirit, Lord. In the unaccompanied child traveling in a dangerous world, let us see your Spirit, Lord. Teach us to recognize that as we walk with each other, you are present. Teach us to welcome not only the strangers in our midst, but also the gifts that they bring as well. The invitation to conversation, communion, and solidarity. This is the help you have sent. We are not alone. We are together on the journey, and for this we give you thanks, O Lord. Amen. So friends, go in peace. Thank you for the good work you are doing in the kingdom. I look forward to seeing you here next week. God bless you.